rare and balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic, providing context on today's events. This is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective on this, the 248th birthday of the United States of America. Hello, everyone. Happy Independence Day to all the Whiskey Warriors, the P1s, the guests, the newcomers, the oldcomers, but don't want to jump in the chat comers, all of you folks. Welcome here to a great patriotic show for today. I've got some videos for you, fairly short videos. I've got some historical stuff. This is not going to be my usual show. I'm going to avoid the politics of today as much as possible. I may make a few comments, but basically I'll try and avoid the comments. And we're going to go on a small historical trip to get to the point where the American colonists, who were British subjects at the time, worked their way up to where they finally had enough and sent a big colonial FU to the King of England at the time. All right, so yeah, 3 Chevys already started. You comments? No way. So let's go ahead and get things kicked off here. I have a very special submission. I have not. Oh, there she is. There she is. She submitted it last night. And it was, I got to tell you, it's going to be a screamer. Instead of our Pledge of Allegiance, we have special for you this evening, an a cappella version of the Star Spangled Banner sung by our own Coco Deminky over on Rumble. Yes, that's right. She actually sang it, and I got to tell you, it's pretty good. It's pretty darn good. She could sing it at a baseball game as far as I'm concerned. But we're going to go ahead and get that kicked off. And then, of course, we'll go through and do our normal other things. And then I'll get into our, the history. So if you would please, and for this, I am not going to say if you are of mind, please do yourself a favor. Please stand, hold your hand over your heart, and follow along, if you would like, with our own Coco Deminky in the Star Spangled Banner.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight all the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home
Oh my gosh, I got chills. You got to see, I got goosebumps. Well, I don't know if you can see them, but I got goosebumps. Oh my gosh. That was absolutely fantastic, Coco. Thank you so much for sending that in and sharing that with us, sharing your wonderful talent and voice. Whew, I got goosebumps all the way down. I got chills. They're multiplying. Anyway, wow. Whew, okay, especially at the end. All right, that is a fantastic way to kick off Independence Day. Boy, I'll tell you, that was an independent voice singing our national anthem, and that was just incredible. Thank you. Thank you so much for that submission. But hey, if you would like to submit your Pledge of Allegiance normally, but I'll take Star Spangled Banner too. If you want to submit those, you can do so by sending me, obviously record yourself doing it, but then sending that audio file to me at fans, F-A-N-S, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans, F-A-N-S, at AmericanPerspective.online. And you can get that sent in to me there. Sorry, my Facebook crashed, and so I have to go back in and take a look. Oh. Facebook is actually also, I'm not only doing the closed captioning here, but I just noticed Facebook's doing it as well. How do you like that? All right. So that being said, of course, it would be apropos that tonight's promo is from the Institute on the Constitution. Ladies and gentlemen, the Institute on the Constitution was established in 2004 as a 501c3 nonprofit with one singular mission: to restore the constitutional republic through grassroots education. All courses and materials are developed using primary source documents and taught from the American view of law and government as defined in the Declaration of Independence in the following 3 key points. 1, there is a God. 2, our rights come from him. And 3, the purpose of civil government is to secure and protect our God-given rights. The IOTC offers the opportunity to educate yourself on our most precious founding document, the Constitution of the United States. They also provide tools to educate your community and get involved with local government. Start by taking their free U.S. Constitution course and go from there. Use my affiliate link, IOTC.AmericanPerspective.online, to sign up, and while you are there, take a moment to look through their other course material and information. My affiliate link, once again, is IOTC.AmericanPerspective.online to get great content to learn about our historical founding and support the show in the process. That's IOTC.AmericanPerspective.online. Or if you just want to purchase this fabulous Saddleback leather-bound U.S. Constitution to support the show, go to Constitution.AmericanPerspective.online. Check this thing out. It has got 1/8 of an inch of Saddleback leather that is wrapped around tear-resistant, water-resistant pages, all bound together, not by cheap glue. No, folks, this is stitched binding all the way through the leather to the backside. Let me tell you, folks, they have a 100-year warranty on this. And they will either fix it or replace it for any material or manufacturing defects for you. In 100 years, you can send it back to the manufacturer and they will either fix it or replace it for free. It is buddy tested, buddy approved, Billy tasted, Billy approved, and my youngest whiskey warrior has verified that the contents inside and the information it presents are accurate, to the point that you can get your civics badge in Scouts using this as a primary source document. Go to Constitution.AmericanPerspective.online and get yours today. Hand it out to that liberal. Watch them try and tear it up. They'll have a rough time doing it. Go to Constitution.AmericanPerspective.online and get yours today. And of course, run off to the Institute on the Constitution and check out all of their other course materials and everything else. They've got some fantastic books and courses and those kinds of things all about our historical founding. It is a fantastic organization. I am proud to be an affiliate of theirs for this. All right, let's get this thing kicked off here tonight. You might hear some pops and booms and things like that, because out here where I live in the boonies, they don't really have much restrictions on some of the stuff that's out here. So if you occasionally hear a over exuberant firework go off, don't be surprised. I try to filter all of that stuff out in terms of the microphone, but it may happen before the end of the show. They were lighting off some, I think, M80s or something earlier, and popping and blowing some stuff up here in the neighborhood. So, all right. For those of us that are essentially American historians, for those of us that actually enjoy history, okay, and especially American history, we tend to get excited over days like today because it gives us the opportunity to be able to look back. And this is far beyond just understanding civics, like 8th grade civics or whatever, okay? But all of the wonderful things that came about that helped shape this country, and the fantastic document that we have now today in terms of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and of course the now defunct document of the Articles of Confederation, which basically created this country in the beginning. These documents are the brain trust of some extraordinarily motivated and smart men. Now, when we look at ourselves and we think, okay, you know, men, smart men, you're looking at somebody maybe of my age, you know, somewhere in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And while a good majority of these folks were in their 30s and 40s, there were people who were in their 20s. And there were people there was at least one we know of, Ben Franklin, who was in his 60s. He was almost 70 when the Declaration of Independence was actually signed. Folks, we need to understand and honor these people because they are fantastic in what they created for this wonderful document that we have that helps to provide the foundation for what we as a republic are supposed to be. And, you know, this is where the Democrats fall. They fall off of this wagon train all the time because they don't understand the intent of the framers. They don't understand the intention and the events that led up to creating the greatest nation that this earth has ever seen in its history. And this is essentially where I would like to start. So we all know about the story of the coming across on the Mayflower. That's usually something that I typically do with that's simply typically something that I do around Thanksgiving because they, you know, the Pilgrims and coming over here with the first Thanksgiving and everything, that is a historical event within our history that really should be celebrated and understood from the reality of the situation. But I want to take a closer look at some of the key points starting as early as the 1760s, where these acts came into, and these incidences, whatever you want to call them, these particular events brought us to the point where we decided. And it wasn't, believe me, this was a long process. It wasn't like all of a sudden we just decided one day, boom, hey, we're going to claim our independence now. This was a very long, drawn-out process. Like I said, it started in the 1760s, okay? And so because of that, we have to go back and look at very specific items. And one thing that we need to understand, too, that sometimes our modern brains can't wrap our heads around this, but when things were transmitted, when news crossed the Atlantic Ocean back and forth between the colonies and Great Britain and back again, okay, or the British Isles, I should say, and back again, it took months. I mean, you're looking at probably a span in many of these cases, anywhere from 6 to 8 months of things occurring. And a lot of times when you sit in classes, we talk about a lot of these events that I'm going to talk about tonight, and we think that they were just like one right after the other. And in a sense, they kind of were. However, there was long gaps in between these particular events because of the slowness of the communications and the transmissions. I mean, we didn't have telephones anymore, or back then. We didn't have the ability to pick up and call Europe immediately. They had to go, letters had to be written. They had to be placed on ships. Those ships had to cross the Atlantic, either direction, and be able to deliver the news. And so, months went by. So this is an example of a very long, drawn out process that realistically, we here in the modern age condense it down into a short period of time. But this is essentially why I need you to understand this took literally over a decade in the making, okay, between early 1760 all the way to 1776 in order for us to make it occur and happen. It was long and drawn out. But before I get to that, let me go ahead and kick off tonight's, on this day in American history. And of course, for on this day in American history, because this is a special day, we're going to do it. Usually I do this on Saturdays, but today is very special. We read from the American Patriots Almanac, written by William J. Bennett and John T.E. Cribb. It is chock full of all kinds of American factoids and information about this great country that we call home. And so we're going to start with July 4th. They risked all. On July 4th, 1776, delegates to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence. The men who issued that famous document realized they were signing their own death warrants, since the British would consider them traitors. Many suffered hardship during the Revolutionary War. William Floyd of New York saw the British use his home for barracks. His family fled to Connecticut, where they lived as refugees. After the war, Floyd found his fields stripped and his house damaged. Richard Stockton of New Jersey was dragged from his bed, thrown into prison, and treated like a common criminal. His home was looted and his fortune badly impaired. He was released in 1777, but his health was broken, and he died a few years later. At age 63, John Hart, another New Jersey signer, hid in the woods during December of 1776 while Hessian soldiers hunted him across the countryside. He died before the war's end. The New Jersey Gazette reported that he continued to the day he was seized with his last illness to discharge the duties of a faithful and upright patriot in the service of his country. Thomas Nelson, a Virginian, commanded militia and served as governor during the Revolution. He reportedly instructed artillerymen to fire at his own house in Yorktown when he heard the British were using it as headquarters. Nelson used his personal credit to raise money for the Patriot cause. His sacrifices left him in financial distress, and he was unable to repair his Yorktown home after the war. Thomas Hayward, Arthur Middleton, and Edward Rutledge, 3 South Carolina signers, served in their state's militia and were captured when the British seized Charleston. They spent a year in a St. Augustine prison, and when released, found their estates plundered. Such were the prices paid, so we may celebrate freedom every Independence Day. Folks, I don't think that anyone here today could understand what these men actually endured. These men wouldn't be going into prison such as what we have today. They would have been enduring a torture, unbelievable amount of torture, unbelievable amount of pain and suffering. Many of these people had wives and children who were taken or possibly even killed. You know, the movie The Patriot, which is a Mel Gibson flick, that gives you a very small glimpse into what potentially hundreds of people endured. And one of the most horrific scenes, but one of the most iconic scenes in my mind in that movie had to deal with the gathering of the town into the church. Now, I'm not going to give away anything, but when that scene comes up, if you haven't seen that movie, I highly recommend that you get it. I tried to watch it today because today would be the most apropos time to watch that film. And unfortunately, it's not, at least not available. So I'm going to have to go and probably buy it so I can sort of like the Charlie Brown ones for Christmas, but I'm going to have to go and buy it just so I have it available to watch every single Independence Day in order to understand, even for a small amount, what these people went through in order to gain independence. And another thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand, too, is that these men were willing to risk everything because of their personal principles and belief systems in terms of what they were doing for that. 3 Chevy, it's called The Patriot. And yes, there you go. Coco got it for you. And I think a lot of people don't seem to understand ultimately what these colonists endured and their principles and their values. They held on to these things so dear that it doesn't even compare to today. There is no way, I'm going to tell you right now, there is literally no way that there are very, very few people here today that would do the exact same things and stand up to an oppressive regime such as the monarchy that was back then in order to be able to stand up and win independence based on everything that they endured. Because they didn't have things such as the Constitution of the United States allowing you to have the freedom of speech, allowing you to be tried, allowing you to have a trial by jury of your peers, allowing you to have a speedy trial. See, I've made the claim on this program, and you're going to catch this. Any people, any of my Whiskey Warriors who have watched this show, when you see a couple of these videos, there are some things that are mentioned in there that when you catch it, if you're watching and listening and you catch it, you'll realize that one of the 10 amendments to the Constitution, known as the Bill of Rights, came from some of the events that these people endured during the American Revolutionary War. And I've made that, I've maintained that, and anyone who is well aware of the 10 amendments to the Constitution, the first 10, all known as the Bill of Rights, you'll catch those and you'll go, there's where this came from, whatever it actually is. Okay? So I encourage you, if you have a copy of the Constitution, have it available and take a look at those 10. Remind yourself of those first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, and you'll see why they were written and where they came from. So first, I need to explain, and I'm going to go through, like I said, I've got a couple of videos, that short videos that I'm going to show you as we go along. But the first thing you need to understand is all of this actually started, the very beginning of the seeds, let's say, of independence came from the end, or started, I should say, at the end of the French and Indian War. Now, the French and Indian War is also known elsewhere as the 7 Years' War of 1763. And that is where all of this stuff, honestly, got started. Okay? And so we're going to start right there with that. So first things first, I want to give you, or I want to play for you a montage of some of the key indications, okay? The key events that occurred throughout time in a very quick succession. They're going to explain it really quickly, but I want you to watch this short video. It's like about 2.5 minutes long. And I want you to watch this short video. This came from history.com. So not my credit. Okay. And here we go with this. So just take a listen to this, and then I'll break it down and discuss some of the key points in a little more detail.
What caused the American Revolution? Like many disputes, this one began over two things: money and respect. It all started in the 1760s, when the British government needed to pay for the French and Indian Wars and turned to the colonies for cash. The first thing they did was require the colonists to buy heavily taxed British goods like sugar.
Americans used sugar to make rum. This was one of the major products of the American economy. And when it became clear that this rum was going to be more expensive, the Americans objected. They wanted their cheap booze.
Parliament said, okay, we get it, and eventually repealed the Sugar Act in 1766, but continued to impose other taxes. In 1765, the government issued the Stamp Act.
The Stamp Act seemed like an even bigger deal than the Sugar Act. The Stamp Act said that legal documents, almost anything on paper, pamphlets, newspapers, playing cards, all of those things needed to have an official stamp that you had to pay for.
To get a stamp, the colonists had to pay a collector. They weren't happy about that.
You really didn't want to be a stamp collector at this point in American history. All the hatred was taken out on them. They had their houses attacked, they had rocks thrown at their windows.
The Stamp Act was eventually repealed, but in 1767, the British tried again with the Townshend Acts, taxing essential imports like paper, glass, and tea.
The Townshend Acts were more taxes. The Americans figured we got rid of the Stamp Act by protest. We'll get rid of the Townshend Acts by protest as well.
The British repealed the Townshend Acts, though they did pass something new, a Tea Act, which gave their own tea merchants a big advantage in the colonial marketplace. We all know how that ended. On December 16, 1773, the colonists dumped 90,000 pounds of tea into Boston Harbor. The British were not happy, pushing back with laws designed to show just who was boss. The colonists hated these, calling them the Intolerable Acts. One, the Quartering Act, forced colonists to give British soldiers food and bedding.
The British figured that they were going to make a statement. We are the people who run this place, not you. The Quartering Act, the other Intolerable Acts, were really a test of strength to see who was stronger, who's going to govern in America. The British said it's us, and the Americans increasingly said, no, it's not.
The Intolerable Acts actually helped to spark something of an American us at a really critical early point of what comes to be the American Revolution.
On April 19, 1775, us versus them became reality as the American Revolution began with a shot heard round the world at Lexington Common.
All right, so that was a quick overview of the individual items. Now, did you notice in terms of the timing of this, this was over several years, okay? And each one was either months or years between the next one that was out there, all right? So let me just kind of summarize these again really quickly. So the Stamp Act started it, and actually before the Stamp Act, there was actually another act that started it. Again, they mentioned it in the video, which was the Sugar Act. And the Sugar Act, messed with the Americans' rum, messed with the Americans' alcohol. So you don't want to mess with an American's alcohol. Let me just tell you that right now. All right. So what ended up happening is the Sugar Act got repealed. Then came the Stamp Act. And keep in mind, all of these acts were because of the fact that the British Crown believed that all of the money that they had spent on the French and Indian War had to be recouped from the American colonists. Because, I mean, it cost just an exorbitant amount of money to ship the British Army, portions of it anyway, over to the American colonies in order to fight the French and Indian War. And so because of that, the British Crown felt, okay, the king felt, all right, I'm going to tax these guys and get them to essentially pay for the entire war and the war chest. And that's exactly how it started it. Now, after the Sugar Act was repealed, they started with the Stamp Act. The Stamp Act was in March 17th of 1765. Now, a lot of people look at the Stamp Act and they think, oh, the Stamp Act, like, the little squares that we lick and put on envelopes. No. This was, think of it as sort of like a notary public, where everything had to have an official stamp of the crown put on it. So, and it was done by individuals who were imbued with that power by the king. And as you heard in the video, they were not treated very well. Their houses were, had rocks thrown at them. The American colonists were really unhappy. Now, keep in mind here, we here in this country, we are taxed roughly 1/3 as an average, okay, at the beginning. This is not taking out anything for, getting credits for like kids or any of that stuff. This is just in the beginning. We're roughly taxed, if you're of a moderate income, roughly 25 to like 33% on average in this country. If you make less than that, you're taxed less based on our progressive system. But this is essentially pennies on the dollar, okay? Or in this case, the British pound. The actual Stamp Act, the actual tea tax was like 2%, 2 to 3% of the cost of tea. And they went ahead and did the Boston Tea Party because they were pissed over a 2 to 3% tax. So this, even today, I'm telling you right now, the framers and the people who started the American Revolution, they would be seriously revolting by now. In fact, I would think that even when the 16th Amendment, which you might want to look up, which gave Congress the ability to tax income, never would have passed back in the colonial days. They never would have allowed that to sit. And so anyway, so we have the Stamp Act in March of 1765. And then we had something that was in the middle of that from June and July of 1767. So this is roughly 2 years from 1765 to 1767, called the Townshend Acts. Now, the Townshend Acts were once again Parliament, because remember, the sugar tax got repealed, the stamp tax got repealed, the Townshend Acts came into play, and it was mainly because the Crown decided that they would establish a board of customs commissioners, which was designed to stop smuggling and corruption among the local officials in the colonies who were often in on the illicit trade. Now, small fact about John Hancock. And most people, when they see the Declaration of Independence in its wonderful form sitting in D.C., the one signature that is down at the bottom that is very recognizable and very well readable by someone who might have, you know, some older eyes is John Hancock's signature. Now, one thing about John Hancock is he actually made his money as a part of the smuggling trade. And he really got pissed when one of his ships, known as the Liberty, was actually confiscated by the British Navy, and its crew and goods were commandeered and taken from him. So John Hancock had a lot of vested interest in independence. Let's just put it that way when it comes to stuff like that. All right. So they tried to stop the smuggling and the corruption. And Americans struck back by organizing a boycott of the British goods that were subject to taxation. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, had a troll in Facebook. So then the next thing that happened, which that video didn't talk about, okay, but the next thing that happened was something that most of us think was just this incredible, like large, huge deal in terms of the number of people who died, but in reality, it was actually quite small. The real reason, or the real thing for all of this, was what was called the Boston Massacre. And I want to play a short video with regards to the Boston Massacre here. Just give me a second to get it set up. Here we go. So we're going to go ahead and listen to this Boston Massacre piece so you get an idea of what the Boston Massacre happened.
Silversmith and political radical Paul Revere captures the moment British soldiers kill 5 colonists in the streets of Boston. His engraving will fuel the fires of revolution as outrage spreads across the 13 colonies. March 5th, 1770. After 3 days of unrest, an angry mob roams the streets. Hundreds of men who lost their jobs and blame the British gather on King Street and face off against 8 redcoats with orders not to fire. What's about to happen will change America forever. A 17-year-old wigmaker's apprentice, Edward Garrick, lights the fuse. This is how wars start. Private Hugh Montgomery is hit with a club. An African-American, Crispus Attucks, dies instantly. When the smoke clears, 4 more are dead.
Unhappy Boston, see thy sons deplore, thy hallowed walks besmeared with guiltless gore, whilst faithless Preston and his savage bands, with murderous rancor, stretch their bloody hands.
The most formidable army in the world, firing on an unarmed crowd. An explosive image with a title that says it all. The Bloody Massacre.
Okay, so now you can see where the bloodshed actually started with the Boston Massacre. Now, this was, again, keep in mind, things had been simmering for quite some time. A few years before that, we started in, in the mid 1760s, and now we're up to 1770, where this occurred. And I noticed that it was actually a disagreement between an apprentice wig maker and a British soldier that led to a crowd of 200 colonists surrounding the 7 British troops that were there, and 7 or 8. And the Americans, of course, egged them on by throwing things and stuff like that. But that's how things start. That's how things occur. And then as the smoke cleared, there were only 3 people who had actually died immediately. 2 others were mortally wounded and later died, of course. But then the massacre itself became a propaganda tool for the colonists with regards to Paul Revere's engraving. Okay. Now, I noticed my closed captioning misspelled the person's name. The first African-American sailor who got shot and killed immediately. It was Crispus Attucks, Crispus Attucks, Attucks, is Crispus Attucks. Well, after that, and of course, this is again simmering tensions all over again, you ended up with the tea tax. And the tea tax started in the ultimate situation there was, of course, the Boston Tea Party. Now, we already have heard a little bit about the Boston Tea Party, but they pulled out, the British withdrew from Boston and repealed much of the Townshend legislation, but they left in place that tax on tea. And in 1773 enacted the new law, the Tea Act, to prop up the financially struggling British East India Company. Now, one thing that you need to understand, Britain had certain businesses that were ingrained or were wrapped around the British Crown as well. And one of them, of course, was the British East India Company. And there is the British East India Company was obviously a trader company that was formed to make trade between the American colonies and Britain. There is a mini-series on, well, I think it's on X, but it might be on Amazon Prime too. But there's a mini-series called Frontier. And Jason Momoa plays in it. Okay, he's the primary actor. And I got to tell you, it's a fantastic mini-series with regards to one man and his, shall we say, rebellion against the British East India Company. I don't know how historically accurate it might be, but it's certainly entertaining. And so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, it would be nice to watch. But don't let the kids watch it, because there's some, shall we say, disturbing parts within it. It is definitely an adult film or an adult miniseries to watch, but you can check that out. That's Frontier. And again, it's Jason Momoa who stars in it. Did a fantastic job. I like Jason Momoa as an actor. But anyway, so back to this. The Tea Act and the purpose of it, which was, of course, to give the company, British East India Company, the extended favorable treatment of the Crown under tax regulations to sell tea at a price that actually undercut American merchants who imported from Dutch traders. Now, one little fact about the Boston Tea Party that a lot of people mess up. The Boston Tea Party, when they dumped that tea into the harbor, that was not actually British tea. It was Chinese tea that came from these Dutch traders, and the ship that they boarded, ironically, was an American-owned ship. One of the colonists, one of the colony companies, actually owned the ship itself that the tea was dumped from. Okay? And this was all done by a group called the Sons of Liberty, who was a generally radical group that decided to confront the British head on. They dressed themselves up as Native Americans. Mohawks is one of the assumed things. They boarded the 3 ships in the Boston Harbor and destroyed more than 92,000 pounds of supposedly British tea, but it wasn't British tea, and by dumping it into the harbor. Okay. To make the point that they were rebels rather than vandals, they avoided harming any of the crew or damaging the ships themselves, and the next day even replaced a padlock that had been broken, reportedly. Okay? Now, regardless, that act of defiance, of course, pissed off the British government. And so shortly thereafter, in March and June of 1774, so December of 1773 was 1773 was actually in December was the Tea Party, so it was cold at the time. The coercive acts came out in March and June of 1774. Now, that was in response to the Boston Tea Party. Remember how I said these things sometimes took 3 to 6 months or longer to come into play. And so the British government decided that they had to tame the rebellious colonists in Massachusetts, in their mind, lest the rest of the colonists follow along. And so in the spring of 1774, Parliament then passed a series of laws called the Coercive Acts, which closed Boston Harbor itself until restitution was paid for the destroyed tea. They went ahead and replaced the colony's elected council with one that was appointed by the British, gave sweeping powers to the British military governor, who was General Thomas Gage, and forbade any town meetings without approval. Hey, yeah, there was a car that went by, a siren went by. Unfortunately, I'm hoping that nobody got hurt, but doesn't, yeah, it's potential tonight. So notice, so we've already hit a couple of things already. If you're watching for the 10 amendments known as the Bill of Rights, we've already hit a couple of them in the discussion so far. So anyway, this one here was forbidding town meetings without approval. Where do you think that came from? Could it be potentially the right to peaceably assemble? Anyway, sorry, just gave it away, but gave one of them away. But anyway, so, and of course, the most provocative provision of that was the Quartering Act. Where do you think that amendment came from? One that most people don't know. And I'll just go ahead and toss it out to you if you don't. It's Amendment number 3, which prevents soldiers from being quartered in personal homes. Take a look. Look it up. I'm telling you. Okay. So they didn't force colonists to board troops in their own homes at the time, but they had to pay for the expense of housing them. Okay. Now we're getting closer to the ultimate Declaration of Independence. Okay. And what we are looking at here is what is known as the Shot Heard Round the World. Now, one thing you have to understand is this is the initial full invested between American colonists and the British Army in terms of armed conflict. So up until this point, the American colonists hadn't picked up arms against Britain. However, British General Thomas Gage, once again, he was the guy in Massachusetts, he led a force of British soldiers from Boston to Lexington, where he planned to capture Sam Adams and the aforementioned John Hancock. Then he was going to head to Concord after he did that and seize the gunpowder that was there. Now, again, keep in mind, this is the start where everyone who went to civics class believes this is the start of the American Revolution. But as I've pointed out to you, it is only the start of armed conflict. The revolution actually started long before this with the colonists resisting all of those taxes. Now, we do know that Lexington and Concord was, shall we say, immortalized in a certain poem. And what poem might that have been? Well, that is the poem of Paul Revere's Ride, written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. So Paul Revere's Ride, which I actually had to remember or memorize at least the first 2 stanzas. And unfortunately, I can recite the first one by heart, but I'm going to go ahead and read just a couple of stanzas for this. So Paul Revere's Ride by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75. Hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year. He said to his friend, if the British march by land or sea from the town tonight, hang a lantern aloft in the belfry arch of the North Church Tower as a signal light, 1 if by land and 2 if by sea, and I, on the opposite shore, shall be ready to ride and spread the alarm through every Middlesex village and farm, for the country folk to be up and to arm. Now, what that is that was the plan Okay. That was the complete plan because of the fact that the Sons of Liberty had learned about Gage's intent to go after Sam Adams and John Hancock and go and confiscate the gunpowder. And this was how they were going to set up an ambush to stop it. Paul Revere was one of the leading American patriots who went ahead and fought for our liberty, which is why he is, pardon the pun, but revered in this poem, as well as many of our history books with regards to what he did. He started off with that etching, then he went to doing this, which, by the way, was, again, the first armed conflict, because he was able to alert the militia enough along the route that they were able to set up in Concord and essentially ambush the British troops and do what was called the shot heard round the world. Now, after that conflict, okay, which on Lexington Common, the British force was confronted by 77 American militiamen, and they began shooting at each other. 7 Americans died, but other militiamen managed to stop the British at Concord and continue to harass them on their retreat back to Boston. British lost 73 dead, with another 174 wounded and 26 that were missing in action. The bloody encounter proved to the British that the colonists were fearsome foes who had to be taken seriously, and it was the start of the Americans' War of Independence. We call it the Revolutionary War. Now, the Revolutionary War itself started in 1775 for that shot around the world and went all the way to 1783. It was, dealing with the tensions between the American colonists and Great Britain, the King of Great Britain. Now, there were several other skirmishes, but that started again in April in Concord and Lexington. But by the following summer, so in the summer of 1775, the rebels were waging a full-scale war for their independence. Now, France jumped into the American Revolution on the side of the colonists in 1778. Okay, so 2 years later than when the Declaration was written. And it was after the French assistance that helped the Continental Army force the British into surrender at Yorktown, Virginia in 1781. Even though the fighting itself did not formally end until 1783. So now we come to the Declaration of Independence. So keep in mind, there are battles that are raging right now because April 1775 was the shot heard around the world. And now what we have is essentially the Continental Congress that came together because the Revolutionary War was already in full swing. Now, this is something that, at least by my recollection, most people don't most people think that the Declaration of Independence, if they actually even know about it, the Declaration of Independence was signed first and then the Revolutionary War happened afterward. No. What happened is the Revolutionary War started, the Declaration of Independence was actually sent, and that's when the rest of the Revolutionary War was starting to be fought all the way up to 1783. Now, you'll also note as well that the same Continental Congress that started the Declaration of Independence, those people knew that they would need a document that would help govern the country, meaning the country of America, throughout this time of war and Revolutionary War. And that is where the Articles of Confederation came from. The Articles of Confederation were developed to make sure that there was a pathway or a framework to have an independent nation be created, but it was too weak. And so because of that, we ended up with the Constitution of the United States. So the Constitution of the United States wasn't the first document that formed our government. And we can get into that a little bit more at another time, but just suffice it to say, to understand that the Declaration of Independence came during the Revolutionary War in the beginning of it. Now, at the Continental Congress, they were basically faced with a vote on the issue. And for those of you that are history buffs and actually watch The Patriot is from a state level connection to whether or not the colony, and I believe it's South Carolina, the South Carolina colony, whether or not they are going to join the war for independence. And that's kind of where the Patriot starts. So you can pick up with that. But that's a state constitution or a state convention, not the constitutional or the Continental Congress. Not the constitutional, but the Continental Congress. So in mid-June of 1776, 5 people were put off into a committee, and it was Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin as a part of it, and they were tasked with drafting a formal statement to the king talking about the colony's intentions. The Congress formally adopted the Declaration of Independence, which was written largely by Jefferson, in Philadelphia on the 4th of July. And that's why we celebrate the 4th of July as Independence Day. Now, that being said, John Adams actually believed and wrote to his wife with regards to July 2nd being the famous day that was going to be in place. But what happened was the Declaration, as written by mostly Thomas Jefferson, was presented to the Continental Congress at the time. They actually went through and ripped out a bunch of words because Thomas Jefferson was a very eloquent and prolific writer, but there were often times where he would take quite a bit of time to get to the point. And so what they ended up doing is they ended up crossing out, removing, rewriting, revising a good portion of the document to get it down to what we know today as the actual Declaration of Independence. However, one part that remained untouched and unscathed by that revision was the preamble. And I'd like to read that to you right now. The unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America. When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, It is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Prudence indeed will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having an indirect object, the establishment of an absolute tyranny over the states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And that is what started the entire thing. That is when all the Declaration of Independence actually is, outside of that wonderful preamble, is a listing of all of the horrid and evil acts that were put upon the colonists that drove them to fight for their independence. And it was on this day, July 4th, 1776, when all of the changes, edits, and everything else were made, and it was read publicly, ultimately being signed not until the finished version was done in August of 1776, when they finally got all of the 56 patriots that signed the bottom of that declaration, and essentially told the King of England, we're through. You've done enough. We want to have our own freedom and independence. And that, folks, is the story of how America came to declare her independence from the King of England, and the colonies started to govern themselves. Now, one thing I do want to bring up that is fairly common, or maybe not known, but fairly comparable, I should say, to today. And that is that a lot of people seem to think that the papers of the age were of these, papers that you would see today, like, the New York Times or the Washington Post, or, all of these large newspapers that had several articles in them. In actuality, they weren't. They were small pamphlets, because paper was at a premium, ink was also at a premium, and so therefore they had to get their thoughts down quickly in the and transmit them quickly to everybody in order to print these things back. And what we need to understand too is that they used these pamphlets to cross over and send out, sort of like, I kind of liken them to little small channels like myself, who are standing up for independence, for our country's independence. So here, I want to read to you just a little bit from the origins of the ideological origins of the American Revolution. Now, I haven't gotten too big into this book, but I caught this, and this caught my eye, and I wanted to read this paragraph to you for it. So, highly flexible, and this is talking about the pamphlets, the little pamphlets that were being sent out by a lot of different people. It wasn't just, one or two different people, but they were very small and very easy to manufacture, as this points out. Highly flexible, easy to manufacture, and cheap. Pamphlets were printed in the American colonies wherever there were printing presses, intellectual ambitions, and political concerns. But in their origins, many of them may be grouped within 3 separate categories. The largest number were direct responses to the great events at the time. For an example, the Stamp Act touched off a heavy flurry of pamphleteering in which basic American positions in constitutional theory were staked out. Its repeal was celebrated by the publication of at least 11 Thanksgiving sermons, all of them crowded with political theory. The Townsend duties led to another burst of pamphleteering, as did the Boston Massacre and precipitating events of the insurrection itself, which included the Tea Party, the Coercive Acts, and the meeting of the First Continental Congress. Folks, this all started by people who basically stood up, and it wasn't big. And by the way, keep in mind, independence really wasn't looked at as the way forward by the majority of the people in the colonies. In fact, many of the people in the colonies did not want independence. As Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot says, why would I trade one single tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away? Not everybody was on board, but it was small things like these pamphlets. It was the time that it took, the writings of very famous and extreme scholars of the time that all wrapped up to the idea that, hey, we can actually stand on our own. And so don't ever think that just because you are the only one standing up talking about this, that you cannot affect or make a difference, that you cannot affect change. Because that is exactly what a small number of very persistent patriots did in order to create the Declaration of Independence, and in order to create the greatest country that this earth has ever seen, that today we celebrate 248 years of existence on this planet. So I'm going to leave you with one last thing. Please do yourselves a favor and be safe tonight. If you're firing off fireworks, make sure you come back with all your fingers at the end of the night, and take it safe. Don't play stupid. Don't do it when you're drunk, that kind of thing. Also, too, make sure you protect the pets. Keep them inside, and hopefully they will survive this night as well as they can in terms of this particular situation. Do me a favor, if you have not done so, please head on over to rumble.com and sign up for an account. It is free. And once there, make sure you follow the American Perspective channel. I am, I think, 4 away from 700, so I really need the help there. If you can please do that, from 700 subscribers. If you enjoy what I bring to the table, that is how you can be alerted every single time I go live. Also, if you are on Rumble, make sure that you hit the thumbs up before you leave, because that helps push my videos up on the leaderboard and makes them aware to Rumble. That's one of the main purposes. Have a wonderful and happy and safe Independence Day. We will see you tomorrow, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on American Perspective. Good night, everybody. Be safe.
The previous broadcast was produced and is owned by Active Eye Media LLC. All rights reserved.